Okay, so I've spoken to many of you before in one of the previous meetings, and so what we're going to do here is cover a little bit on the project itself. So what we were asked to do was a little different. I am not an early education person, so you can wipe that off the table. My background is in finance and marketing, and the team we had here, the 5 of us, are financial modelers. So what you were asking us to do is say, what is the return on investment of this big lift effort that we're putting all this money into? Can we find an economic return above that of just the social returns? And let's face it, having children read and participating in the community, that is a huge win right there, even if it had no economic value. But beyond that, we found that there is, and we'll talk about that a little more. This is our advertising slide. We don't come free either, but thanks to the business school, they sponsor us to do this. Okay, so what we had is a 5, and I keep changing my head, and I change the voice here. Anyway, we had 5 segments to this project, as you'll see on the slide. The first one was a literature research. We're doing financial modeling on the economic impact or the the financial impact of somebody going to preschool. You know what? By the time they show up in kindergarten, there isn't a lot of return yet. It takes time for them to have the benefits of that preschool, and so the studies we found go out 40 years plus. We had a 6-month project, so we didn't start by doing base research on your students here. So we did a little literature research to find out what's been done by others. We compiled all that data to build a model, and that's where we had our 3rd phase of the project. We also interviewed the stakeholders, some of you in this room and others in the community. And then we went out and built a draft model. We tested it with many of you here. We developed some use cases of how would you use this model to make sure it was useful. And then we finally finished the model and turned it over to the county, which hopefully is using it wisely. Okay, those phases are on the screen there, and we'll talk a little about them as we go. First, let's just come up with the basics. If you provide, and I won't name any communities here, but if you found a community that happened to be in your county that already had a robust system where every student in that county was going to preschool, funded by their parents or somebody else, and you came in with the big lift and dropped a preschool program on them and said, here, now we'll give this to you free, what's your return on investment? 0, right? Because you're replacing something that's already there. So there's the bottom side. This room, on the other hand, is the other extreme. If you take people that have existing budgets, you do not change a single thing about those budgets, but you happen to work together to get a better result by coordinating, what's the return on investment? Infinite, right? You've got that basic thing in math where the denominator is 0. Dividing by 0 gives you an infinite result. So that's what we really look for the big lift here, is those infinite results of coordination. Everything else, unfortunately, is in the middle. So they asked the question, not of the easy ones of either extreme, but what happens in the middle. And so that's what we looked at. So we looked at the 4 pillars you have in the model, and the only one that had a lot of research on it was actually preschool. We think there are a lot of benefits around tuition. We couldn't find any long-term benefits in terms of financial return, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Same thing with summer education programs. There's lots of indications of efficacy of having the education in the summer, but there's no economic return to the participants for having done it. So it's a second step of research that hasn't been completed. Doesn't mean there isn't a return, just means there's no research data. The other one was parent involvement, parent engagement. Obviously, that should have good benefits, but again, no economic, no financial return on that effort. So we could only study the 1 pillar of your model, and the good news for us is that's the vast majority of the money you spend. So we covered that. We found studies, these are 3 of the bigger ones that are out there, and as you can see on the far side of the screen, they have the return on investments. I don't know if anybody else over here can see them. Those are the big models that are out there. Perry Preschool, Chicago School System, they have been quoted for many studies because they have 40 years worth of data. So it's really good. You can see what's happening. And so we use those a lot. These are the returns we found. And as you can see, we have the easy one, the easy one at the top here, which is having preschool for the state of Ohio up there. We also have other ones here. The big difference that we put in here is you'll see that Perry's preschool to age 27 or to age 40. We had a pretty simple model that said very few people retire at age 27 or age 40. Some people are fortunate enough to do that, but very few. So we said, what the heck, let's go through the lifetime. Now, maybe some of you will earn income still into your 70s, but we decided 65 was plenty, and so we ended it there. So that's one of the reasons we have a little higher return than some of the others, but it's a completely reasonable thing that people wouldn't stop working at 27. This is the way the model is built, and one of the things that was covered in the preamble is really important right there. We have looked at the model in 3 different ways in terms of the distribution of the students. 60% of them being in the targeted group versus 27 if you do the entire community. And the idea goes back to the first comments I made. If people already have preschool and you're replacing it with a public preschool, you're not gaining a great deal of benefit. So if you look across your community, your biggest benefit are those who aren't going to preschool today, which is what your very targeted program today is doing. You're going after the people of greatest need, and no surprise, that's your greatest return. So that's what we've got here. We did adjust some of the economic factors for the county. As people might have noticed, it costs a little bit more to live here than it does in Ohio. So we tried to take that into account in a number of ways, but again, tried to do it conservatively. So that tended to bring up some of the numbers. So that's how we got here. And I'll cover a little more. And this is where you wind up, which is, dum-da-dum. Yes, drum roll, please. So for every dollar you put in to preschool in the big lift with the quality preschool that you're putting in place, you should get $11 back over the lifetime of those students. Yay! That's all for you guys. You're the ones who have to deliver this, right? But it looks very promising. By selecting the students well, by targeting the education, by improving it, the return on investment should be substantial. We break that return on investment down through 8 areas, as you'll see on the screen there. The biggest one is net earnings. And what is net earnings? If you graduate high school, you earn a lot more money than if you don't. And there's the simplest answer there. And by doing this, the financial modeling indicates by getting the people to read at 3rd grade, by getting them into preschool successfully, more will graduate, and that will increase your economic return. So that's the biggest one right there. Now that leads to taxes, that leads to other benefits that are on there. It leads to some that I hadn't thought about a great deal, but it leads to reductions in costs in the juvenile justice system. It leads to reductions in special education. So there are a bunch of areas that we can document that should show statistical improvement over time by the Big Lift program being in place. So that's quite interesting. This is a picture of the way a lot of financial models is done. They call this the Waterfall Diagram. If you just start at the left side of the screen, you add up the components, and this is broken out by who receives the benefit. And so the benefit to participants is the first one, the benefits to federal government, the benefits to state and local, the benefits to rest of society, and that's things like if there's less juvenile crime, they're not going to break my flower pots or whatever it is, so damage to people from crime. And then, though that leads to the total benefit, the one red number there is the cost of the program. And then when you're at the far right side of it, that's your gain. So it's a very nice description of saying the cost is the red one, the benefit is the blue at the very end. So it is a very successful program from that standpoint. The other way to think about the program is when do I get the benefit? Somehow when you put that check is in the mail, people ask when. And this is that side of the slide. So as you can see and as you would expect, initially the costs are providing the education. And very few people earn a lot of income in kindergarten. It might happen, but not greatly. So your costs aren't recovered yet. You have lower special ed rates, you have lower other costs, but as you can see, the primary benefit begins once people are working. So once they leave the school system and go on. And then adheres to the rest of their life at the higher benefits. So that's why taking it out to age 65 led to a higher multiplier. I've rattled off lots of numbers. I either have glazed eyes or everybody's got it. I love it. This is the summary. If anybody has questions, I'm here to answer a few of them. I'll tell you a little more about the summary here. These are the qualifiers. This is sort of like any of those ads you see for financial reports. These are historical projections. They may not mirror what you get. So the first assumption is the vast majority of students are at risk. So we talked a little bit earlier about your program from now through 2025 or whenever. As long as you're targeted on the most at need, you get the highest benefit. So this 11.2 return is for those targeted. If you do the whole community, that number is going to come down dramatically. As you saw in some of the earlier numbers we've presented to this group, your return is going to go down. It's still positive, even if you did statewide, and Karl, who was here previously, did this study for the entire state of California, you still get a 2.2 return if you do every student, universal preschool for the entire state. But it's not 11, so a little bit of a difference there. The other part is the enhanced spaces. Right now, you're taking advantage of classrooms that exist. Your costs are going to be a little bit higher if you have to build new preschools. So the two sides of the equation when you're doing an ROI is return divided by cost. So if the costs go up, the return goes down. So you have to think about both sides of it. Right now, when you're using existing space for the most at need, you get your highest return. The second part is the ROI alone is not going to win anybody over. We tend to, in the finance side, we tend to glaze over eyeballs, not inspire them. I think it's a problem with our profession, but it's part of the answer, but it's not the whole story. And so I think saying that in context is important here. So the assumptions, in some cases, weren't San Mateo only. Juvenile justice, some of those data were only available statewide. So some of the data is statewide data, some of it's San Mateo. Some cases we were able to target to the specific school districts in the big lift right now. So it's a question there, depends on the granularity of the data. Okay, lion's share of the benefits accrue to participants. That's something that's real important. The primary benefit here is people who graduate earn more money. They don't earn it for you, they earn it for themselves. They do pay taxes, they do other things, but it's a society benefit to have them be a participant. So I think that's important there. And the other side is the benefits are later. We're talking about preschool. You generally have some reduced cost while they're in school, i.e. the special ed or the juvenile justice or some of those, but the major benefits come later in life, as with so many things. So ROI is sort of the table stakes. We're happy to provide table stakes, but now you need to do the harder work of the benefits. These are some of our recommendations. So continue to focus on the high-risk students. We'll keep your ROI up if you're looking for that. Certainly expanding to the general community is a benefit to the community. Some of the model is highly sensitive to the characteristics of the students. So you will get different numbers if you use different student pools. And so that's just a qualifier here. Cost structure. Again, I've already mentioned that a little bit. If you change and you're all of a sudden building new schools and your costs go up, that will reduce your return on investment for the program. So it's just something to be aware of there. On the messaging standpoint, that's the other part here. We think it's real important to talk about the big lift boosting literacy to drive economic return. So the key thing there being literacy, student participation, as somebody taught me earlier on, citizenship is what they're really after here from the preschool on up. The economic benefit's nice. All right. Any other questions?
So we can take a few questions.
Yes.
Karl, thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Karl, thank you for the presentation. Repetition really helps.
You've seen it twice. Yeah.
Yes, I have. And I just wanted to make sure I got that right. In the beginning, you said we didn't look at attendance, we didn't look at family engagement, and we didn't look at the summer because there really wasn't a lot of evidence to look at those ROIs. So would it be fair to say that given the preschool, which looks very, very promising, if we had those other pieces in there, the likelihood is that we would also see a return on investment on those.
Correct. You'd see a return on investment on those. It may be higher or it may be lower. For example, we did some reading on the attendance numbers, and attendance is very much like the preschool. Once a person stops attending regularly, it cascades down and they attend less and less. But if you keep them attending, then you get a pretty good return because they participate longer. Summer may be a benefit, but instead of being an 11-to-1, adding summer may only double it, and so you get 2-to-1. So it's not necessarily obvious which way the total return will go when you add the other pillars in, but we didn't find any evidence that any of them would be negative. They all look great. They just didn't have financial return attached to the studies. That 40-year thing just gets in the way. Yes.
I noticed on the metrics, looking at the different cost offsets, that there wasn't anything related to medical treatment, mental health treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, and we do often find for kids in the juvenile justice system, for example, special ed as well,
Right.
that there are a whole lot of costs in the medical system that are related. So I just wondered, is that because you didn't find anything, or?
That has to do with the studies we had to use.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Perry Preschool and Chicago School System, they didn't choose to study the health implications for their 40-year study. So we need somebody else. I suspect there's a dozen other factors somebody could have picked, but they only picked 9.
Yeah.
Karl, what do you have included in the benefits that accrue to the state and federal government?
They're in there, yes.
What are they?
Oh, taxes.
They're basically...
Well, the first level for the state and federal government is taxes
Right.
on the income. So that's the first one. The other one is the state and local governments pay for the schools, so any juvenile justice or costs that are reduced, any special ed costs, those all go to the state.
So is there any place that's factored in to the extent that the lion's share benefits go to the participants and they have higher incomes? Is there anything that factors in decreased public assistance costs? Is that...
Public assistance cost isn't factored in. The other thing we didn't factor in were multiplier effects. You're going to be paying these teachers, and then they're going to go buy groceries and things like that. So if you do some of the economic analysis, say for a sports stadium, they figure these multiplier effects. We didn't include that. It's only direct costs.
Is there any sensitivity in the model to the quality of the preschool intervention?
There is. We had 2 levels of quality, well, 3. We had no preschool, which was A-level quality. Then we had a weak preschool and an enhanced. And so we're assuming that the big lift is enhanced.
Okay. So in terms of how it's carried out, if we did an A+ job versus an A- job, there's not
that much sensitive in the model. There are 3. There's none, good, and great.
Okay, I have one more question.
I'm going to bring it back to the summer since that's kind of where
Oh,
my
go for the
focus is.
summer.
But I've always heard that kids who participate in high-quality enrichment programs are more likely to graduate high school. And it seems like that was like one of the biggest
Right, it is.
returns. Is there a way to, I don't know, make that
The
connection?
problem, there is a way to make that connection. We didn't find any studies that connected it, though. So there were, in fact, there were just some on the news recently about people doing summer programs and getting at least a net positive in terms of not the drop of 15, 20% in their abilities, but maybe neutral or above. But they didn't carry the studies forward to graduation rates and then to earnings or cost implications. So that it's a matter of what did they model. A lot of the studies on education model the qualitative outcomes of whether they enhanced education, but they don't model whether that affected money. And so we were asked about the money.
Great. And one other thing on that, we know there's efficacy for both summer interventions and attendance programs and other things and family engagement programs. They just didn't have the economic analysis of what the benefit would be. So
Right. A good example there is, because we were curious, we called Annie Casey and we talked to the researcher who put together the model of the 4 pillars, and we said, this is what we're looking to do. What data do you have on this? She said, gosh, if you can get some data, we'd love it. So you guys are going to gather the data, and Annie Casey will be happy, and then the next group will have this data.